Well, let's talk about a few of your missives. Missives is probably not the right word.
Yeah, I'm not telling anyone anything. I'm not trying to persuade anyone of anything. So if people don't like it, some people get triggered on Twitter and they start arguing. It's like, just leave. Just don't listen to it.
The one I'm going to read would be a great one for people to get really upset about. Or I would find it comical to look at the comments of people who are upset. But the line is this: imagine how effective you would be if you weren't anxious all the time. Why did you put this out? And have you seen highly anxious people become people who experience very little anxiety? Is that something you've seen? But first, why did you put this up? Like, what was behind it? And then have you seen anxious people become largely, I guess, unanxious or non-anxious people?
Yeah, most of my tweets are not very deliberate or thought through. What's happening is I've been thinking about some concept for, months, years, whatever. It's just been percolating. And then all of a sudden it'll come to me sort of in like one pithy sentence where I'm like, oh, this is how I will remember this thing. This is how I can distill this down into a pointer for myself so that when I need to make decisions, I can retrieve that whole line of reasoning. And so where this comes from is basically, like everybody after a certain age, I am taking responsibility for my own happiness and peace and quality of life. And one of the things you learn after you make money is that money doesn't make you happier. It takes care of your money problems, but it's not necessarily going to put you in a place where you're in some kind of bliss all the time. In fact, there's nothing out there that will make you happy forever. So you sort of have to take responsibility for guiding yourself in such a way that your mental state ends up where you want it. And so I've been working on my mental state, and I have, working is a big word. I don't even want to say I've been working on it, but I would say my mental state has gotten to a place which is much better than it used to be. And people will often say, well, I don't want to do that because it'll take away my ambition. I want to succeed right now. And so I've thought about that a fair bit. And is that true or not? Well, certainly for me in the last few years, since I've become calmer, my effectiveness has gone through the roof and I've been more successful. But it's hard to disambiguate that from, well, also maybe you're just later in your career, you're in a better position for it. And that's a valid criticism. So one of the things I've been trying to figure out is like, would I have been as successful? And it's hard to do the counterfactual, obviously, if I wasn't as anxious, because anxiety is, comes from fear. And it's also a motivator. It makes you get off your butt. And one of the ways to make the anxiety go away, at least until the next piece of anxiety comes along, is to go do something about it. So what is the role of anxiety? Well, firstly, I noted that pretty much everybody's anxious all the time. It's a rare human being who isn't anxious. And it makes sense. We're alpha predators. We took over this earth and domesticated or killed all the other animals. And we did that by being the most paranoid, the most fearful, the most angry predators this world has ever seen. So anxiety is built into the core of who we are. In fact, you could argue that all the mind does all day long is fear-based scenario planning for survival, and then maybe a little bit of greed for replication. So anxiety is at the core level of who we are. But certainly some people are more anxious than others. There's no question. And some people seem to be much calmer about it. So which is more useful for effectiveness? So assuming that your goal is, your motivation is intrinsic, you're doing the thing because you love it or because you really want it, and you can separate that motivation from anxiety, then I think you can take on certain superpowers. And we kind of all intrinsically know this. Like if you look at, samurai warriors, right? Like Miyamoto Musashi is in a duel with somebody else. You know that the person who is calmer is going to win. In all those movies, it's the one who's incredibly still, then swipes with his sword incredibly quickly and is then still again. That's the winner, the one who has a Zen state of mind. Similarly, in the Terminator movies, part of the reason you fear the Terminator is because he's a robot. He's unstoppable. He's implacable. You can't argue with him. You can't communicate with him. You can't make him slow down. And he has no remorse. He just keeps coming. Or in that old Clint Eastwood movie, Unforgiven, the guy who wins the gunfight is the one who doesn't flinch. He's just keeping his cool while he's loading his gun and shooting. He's not like all over the place running around. So I just think we waste so much energy through anxiety that if you can be calm and still go about your business, it's a superpower. And I realized this myself recently, where I was in a conflict situation in business. It was a high conflict situation. It was unfortunate. I think we've solved it. But as I went through this high conflict situation, I'd been through one like it years before where I was much more anxious. And I remember that time period. And I remember how much I was sweating it and how nervous I was and how I went through bouts of fear and anger and how kind of worked up I was the entire time, intense, and didn't get much sleep. But this time I was incredibly calm. And I was almost enjoying it because it was like practicing my craft. Now, of course, it's easier to do now because I have more money. But at the same time, it just didn't bother me. It was just very mechanical. And because of that, I could be very effective about it. And I could be effective about it while doing lots and lots of other things. My mind wasn't constantly spinning in a whirlpool, taking on 10 different problems and just fear-based scenario planning all the time. Most of these things were never going to happen. So I do believe that being calm and still going about your business is the superpower. Now, yes, if anxiety is your only motivator, then you have a problem. But I would argue the pure motivations don't come out of anxiety.